Welcome to Ouster Nation, a podcast dedicated to democracy. This is Marilynn Stark, and let's get started. Over the weekend of December 6, 2024 and onwards, the world witnessed a major shift in the internal concentrations of power when Syria's president, Bashar al-Assad, experienced an ouster by Syrian rebels. The rebellious groups consolidated an offensive militant incursion led by HTS, which stands for Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, starting on November 27th. Up in the northwest of Syria, a former al-Qaeda fighter, Abu Muhammad al-Julani, born as Ahmad al-Shara, had worked to form a kind of shadow government in Idlib Governorate and Idlib, its capital city. The rebels moved southward to capture first Aleppo, the second largest city of Syria, arriving on November 29th. The fall of Aleppo came on November 30th. By December 3rd, the rebel fighters, comprised of the Syrian National Army of northeast Syria and the aforementioned HTS, were marching on Hama, the fourth largest city of Syria. By the 5th, Hama had been seized by rebel fighters. The Syrian National Army is backed by Recep Tayyip Erdogan, leader of Turkey. On December 6, there was an uprising in Daraa, a southern province. The rebel insurgents captured a string of towns, moving southward from Hama to Homs, to Damascus, Syria's capital city. Assad's soldiers were ultimately ordered to drop their weapons, don civilian clothes, and go home. Thousands of them, however, left for Iraq, bearing materiel. The attack on Damascus took place on December 7th. Indeed, it was a component of rebel fighters from the Daraa province, down south, who began attacking Damascus while the HTS army arrived in Homs. The actual seizing of Damascus occurred on December 8th. Assad's army was demoralized since they were underpaid. Assad could mount no opposition to the rebel takeovers, and Russia was overburdened by her war in Ukraine. At the same time, Iran had been backing Hezbollah to defend the Assad regime, but Israel was fighting Hezbollah, thus decommissioning Iran. Neither Iran nor Russia could intervene on the behalf of the Assad regime. Russia, for its part, had been militarily intervening in the Syrian civil war since 2015 in order to oppose Syrian opposition and ISIS, who were contesting against the Syrian Arab armed forces of the Syrian Arab Republic under Assad. Damascus and Homs were seized by the rebels December 8th, and the almost 54-year reign of the Assad family, starting with Hafez al-Assad, was summarily ended. Late Saturday, the Assad family was successfully exiled for shelter in Russia. Israel, for its part, has been reducing the capabilities of the remaining factions to use any of the armaments that could, in the future, bring on a continuing war. The idea at present is to resume some kind of a government. The banks in Damascus today were open, and the government offices were also being entered by government workers. The leader of HTS, Ahmad al-Shara, is hopeful that he can consolidate his goodwill using his past experience in Idlib in forming some kind of a governing body. In Idlib, he had instituted social services for the people and gathered together the good sentiments of the local population. He has changed his profile considerably since he was a member of al-Qaeda. Even though he is thought to remain yet a jihadist, he does hope that he can cause there to be a new day for all of the peoples who are currently in Syria. The prison experienced a mass exodus of its prisoners. Currently, there are 100,000 prisoners held in a huge torture chamber, and the authorities on hand are calling for former prison guards to give the codes so that this torture chamber can even be opened in order to save the lives of those 100,000 prisoners. Immense torture is the rule of the day for those who occupy that large chamber underground, and they are placed there for the rest of their lives. Many, many prisoners were greeted by family members outside the prison as they left the prison gates. Moreover, there are millions of refugees in Turkey. President Erdogan has declared that he will make it rather easy for those refugees who have resided in Turkey for years to return to their homeland with as much ease as he can muster. Now the question comes, how will this nation, which has been consumed in a civil war for 13 years, patch together some form of government given the diverse set of people and sects that actually populate the rather complex population of Syria? These people have been living under a tyrant, Bashar al-Assad, and they are weary of living to begin with, in a very real sense. However, there is great hope abroad, and the rebels are jubilant in that they have succeeded most masterfully in their quest to liberate Syria once again. The felling of the Assad regime will cause there to be a major change in the very face of the conflicts that have fallen into the Middle East modern day as quite normal, much like a precipitation from some unheavenly heaven upon the earth beneath. No one really knows how to solidify a peace among the nations of the Middle East. However, with the absence of Assad now on the political slate, there will be very great changes in the axis of power that emanates from the Middle East. Netanyahu of Israel has declared a great intervention on the part of Israel in the way of keeping a peace in Syria by destroying military assets throughout the land. There have been over 300 explosions reported. If rebel factions do not have access to military armaments and so forth, the hope for forging a new government without all of the fanfare of violence is greatly increased. However, the memory of 400,000 civilians dying in the civil war, alongside 200,000 military personnel dying, will indeed present a challenge to the new leadership. The people may be hopeless, war-weary, and afraid of lack of success in their efforts to really forge a lasting peace and a peace-loving government. Although the THS leader, al-Assad, has appointed an interim prime minister by the name of Mohammed al-Bashir, still, the outer world forces feel a certain uncertainty of a political void in Syria, and this will undoubtedly affect Syria. Syria has to gain credibility as it moves along towards a lasting peace, a solid government. Syria, having been warred upon for so long, might have great resistance in establishing the order necessary to stabilize Syria. December 12th is only the third day since the Assad regime was ousted. There's great joy among the people in Damascus as they celebrate the defeat of a horrible tyrant. One of the questions the growing government will face will be how to handle the 3 million Syrian refugees. At this time, nearly 70% of the people of Syria are poor. Unemployment is also rampant, and 30% of the people on the land of Syria are displaced. In summary, then, the internal conditions of Syria are quite demanding, challenging, and uncertain. However, we must then analyze more of the effects of this ending of the Assad regime on the Middle East situation overall. Two countries that come to mind, of course, are Russia and Iran. This is a complex situation centering on Syria. Now it's different, but in the past, Iran had called upon Hezbollah, which is sponsored by Lebanon, to back the defense of Assad in Syria. As we mentioned, Israel had launched a very great attack on Hezbollah and leveled it. Israel's attack, of course, helped to take Assad down and out of power. Perhaps no one can really predict how much influence Iran will lose in the Middle East through the felling of Assad. That is for certain. But according to Reuters, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, attributed the fall of President Bashar al-Assad to the U.S. and Israel. He believes that these two countries had planned this overthrow. Mentioning also a third country, but not by name, rather only by blank accusation, he says is backed by evidence, Khamenei was referring to Turkey. In 2011, the civil war started in Syria, at which Erdogan pleaded with his friend Assad to stop the brutality he was raining upon his people. However, this turned out to be the end of their friendship. Erdogan began to back counter-Assad regime forces, including the Syrian National Army. Erdogan thus gained control of vast swaths of northern Syria. Indeed, Erdogan had strengthened his opposition to Assad's regime by defeating Kurdish influence in northern Syria, where Turkey shares a border with Syria. We must be reminded that Turkey is a member of NATO. Yet Iran is famous for running what is called an axis of resistance, an alliance that tries to exert opposition to the military and political influence of the U.S. and Israel in the Middle East. Iran also supported Assad militarily in a direct manner by spending profusely in the billions of dollars, and by sending in boots on the ground, the boots of its great revolutionary guards. Of course, Khamenei, further in the Reuters report, says he wants to continue relations with Damascus. Khamenei reasserted his militant intent insofar as the axis of resistance. He is quoted as saying, and I quote, "The more pressure you exert, the stronger the resistance becomes. The more crimes you commit, the more determined it becomes. The more you fight against it, the more it expands." End of quote. He also said, in praise of his by now certainly less influential country, since the toppling of the Assad reign of terror against his people, quote, Iran is strong and powerful and will become even stronger, end of quote. Needless to say, like Iran, Russia has experienced a marked diminution of influence on the geopolitical scene through the overthrow of Assad in Syria. This topic and its full ramifications will be considered in the next podcast. Until then, and I'm looking forward to seeing you, please do like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Thank you. Goodbye for now.